The sun was sinking low over the endless plains, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Dust swirled lazily in the warm evening air, stirred by the hooves of cattle being driven back toward the ranch. Among the riders was a man who stood out from the rest, not just for his towering frame, but for the way silence seemed to follow him, as if even the wind respected his presence. They called him Cole the Giant McGraw, a cowboy whose strength was as legendary as his solitude. He was the kind of man who could break a wild stallion with his bare hands, yet never let anyone close enough to break the walls around his heart. Folks whispered about him in saloons, saying he was carved from stone, a man who lived only for the land, the cattle, and the endless horizon. But there was one person who knew better. From the porch of the ranch house, Clara Dawson watched him ride in, her eyes following his every move. She had known Cole for years, seen him fight storms, outlaws, and the harshness of the frontier itself. Yet what she had never seen, what no one had ever seen, was the man behind the armor he wore. And tonight, something in the way he dismounted, something in the way his gaze lingered on her, told her that the unshakable cowboy was about to reveal a truth he had buried deep for far too long. The Wild West was a land of danger, of gunfights and betrayals. But Clara was about to learn that the most powerful moment of all wasn't found in the clash of steel or the roar of thunder. It was in the quiet words of a man who had never spoken his heart. The ranch yard was quiet except for the creak of leather saddles and the lowing of cattle in the distance. Cole McGraw swung down from his horse, his boots striking the dirt with a heavy thud that seemed to echo louder than it should have. He stood there for a moment, one hand resting on the saddle horn, the other brushing dust from his broad shoulders. His hat shadowed his face, but Clara could see the tension in the way his jaw tightened. She had seen him return from cattle drives, battered and bruised, from barroom brawls with blood in his knuckles, from storms that left lesser men broken. But tonight, there was something different in his stance. He wasn't carrying the weight of the trail or the burden of the herd. He was carrying something heavier, something he had never dared to show. Clara's heart quickened. She gripped the railing of the porch, her knuckles white against the wood. For years she had watched him from this very spot, always wondering if the man behind the legend would ever let her in. She had heard the whispers in town. Cole McGraw doesn't need anyone. Cole McGraw was born to ride alone. And maybe they were right. But the way his eyes found hers now, steady and unflinching, told her otherwise. Cole took a slow step forward, then another. Each stride seemed deliberate, as though he were walking into a gunfight rather than toward the woman who had quietly held his heart. The air between them grew thick, charged with something unspoken. Clara wanted to speak, to break the silence, but her voice caught in her throat. Finally, he stopped at the foot of the porch. For a long moment, he said nothing. The cicadas hummed in the distance, and the last rays of sunlight stretched across the plains like fading embers. Then in a voice low and rough from years of dust and whiskey, he spoke. "Clara." He paused as if the name itself carried a weight he wasn't sure he could bear. "I've fought storms, outlaws, and every kind of devil this land can throw at a man. But none of it ever scared me half as much as this." Her breath caught. "This?" she whispered, though she wasn't sure he even heard. Cole's eyes softened, though his voice stayed steady. "Standing here, looking at you, knowing I can't keep riding on like I have been. I've been a fool, Clara, A damn fool for thinking I could keep my heart locked away. The words hung in the air, heavier than any gunshot. Clara felt her chest tighten, her pulse racing. She had dreamed of this moment, but never truly believed it would come. Cole stepped closer, his massive frame casting a shadow across the porch. I ain't a man of fancy words. Never was. But I'll tell you plain, from this day on, he drew in a breath, his voice dropping to a near growl. Yeah, I'll be yours. Only yours. The world seemed to stop. The cattle, the cicadas, even the wind itself fell silent, as though the land was holding its breath. Clara's eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief. She had always known Cole was strong, but this was the kind of strength no one had ever seen in him before. And yet, even as the words settled between them, a shadow of doubt flickered in her mind. Could a man like Cole McGraw, forged in the fire of the Wild West, truly lay down his solitude? Could he really belong to one woman and one woman alone? The answer, she knew, would not come easy. For in the West, promises were tested not by words but by trials, by the kind of hardships that could break even the toughest cowboy. And as the night crept in, Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Because deep down she sensed that Cole's confession was only the beginning of a story that would test them both in ways neither could yet imagine. The night settled heavy over the plains, the kind of night where the stars burned sharp and cold, and every sound carried farther than it should. Cole McGraw lingered by the porch after his confession, his broad shoulders outlined against the lantern glow. Clara stood frozen, her heart still echoing with the words he had spoken. I'll be yours, only yours. But in the Wild West, no vow went untested. From the far edge of the ranch came the distant rumble of hooves. At first, Clara thought it was just the cattle shifting in the dark. But Cole's head snapped toward the sound, his instincts sharper than any man's. He narrowed his eyes, the softness of his confession hardening back into the steel of a gunslinger. Stay here, he muttered, his voice low but commanding. Clara's breath caught. Cole, what is it? He didn't answer. Instead, he strode to his horse, pulling the rifle from its scabbard in one smooth motion. The sound of the lever clicking into place was enough to send a chill down Clara's spine. She knew that sound meant trouble. Moments later, 3 riders emerged from the darkness, their silhouettes jagged against the starlit horizon. They rode slow, deliberate, like men who wanted to be seen. The lead rider wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, his coat flapping in the night wind. Even from a distance, Clara could feel the menace rolling off them. Cole stepped forward, planting himself between the porch and the riders. His voice carried across the yard, steady as stone. You boys are a long way from town. State your business. The lead rider chuckled, a sound that was more threat than humor. Business, McGraw. That's exactly what brings us here. Heard tell you've been keeping to yourself out here, playing the lone wolf. But word travels fast. Seems you found yourself a weakness. His gaze slid toward Clara, and the smirk that followed made her blood run cold. Cole's grip tightened on the rifle. You best keep your eyes off her. The rider leaned forward in his saddle. Or what? You'll shoot us down in your own yard. Folks say you're the toughest man this side of the Rio Grande, Cole. But even the toughest man bleeds. And a man who starts making promises to a woman, well, that makes him easier to break. The words cut deep, not because Cole feared them, but because they struck at the truth he had only just admitted. For years he had lived without ties, without anyone to lose. But now, standing there with Clara behind him, he knew he had something worth protecting, and that made him vulnerable. Clara's heart pounded as she watched him. She wanted to scream, to tell the riders to leave, but she knew this was Cole's fight. Still, she could see the storm brewing in his eyes. This wasn't just about her. This was about every wall he had built, every mile he had ridden alone, every battle he had fought to keep his heart locked away. Cole raised the rifle, the barrel glinting in the lantern light. "You boys got one chance. Turn around and ride out of here. Don't come back." The silence that followed was suffocating. The riders shifted in their saddles, hands twitching near their holsters. The air was thick with the promise of violence. Clara gripped the porch railing so hard her fingers ached, praying the night wouldn't end in blood. Finally, the lead rider spat into the dirt. "This ain't over, McGraw. You can't change what you are. A man like you don't get to have peace, and you sure as hell don't get to keep her without a fight." With that, he wheeled his horse around, the others following close behind. Their laughter echoed across the plains as they disappeared into the dark, leaving only the dust of their passing. Cole lowered the rifle slowly, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he turned back to Clara, his eyes shadowed with something she had never seen before. Not fear, but the weight of inevitability. "They'll be back," he said quietly. "Men like that don't walk away. They'll test me. They'll test us." Clara stepped down from the porch, her skirts brushing the dirt as she came to stand before him. She reached for his hand, her voice trembling but resolute. "Then let them come. I'd rather face the storm with you than live safe without you." Cole's hand closed around hers, rough and calloused, yet steady as the earth itself. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something greater, for someone. But as the night deepened and the coyotes howled in the distance, both of them knew the truth. The Wild West was merciless, and love was the most dangerous gamble of all. The days that followed Cole's vow were uneasy ones. The ranch seemed quieter, yet beneath that quiet lay a tension that neither Clara nor Cole could ignore. Every creak of the windmill, every distant echo of hooves set their nerves on edge. Clara tried to keep busy, mending clothes, tending the garden, humming old songs to calm her heart. But her eyes always drifted to the horizon, searching for the riders who had promised to return. Cole, meanwhile, was a man transformed. He still worked the cattle, still rode the fences, but there was a new weight in his movements. He sharpened his knives more often, cleaned his rifle with meticulous care, and at night, when he thought Clara was asleep, he sat by the window with his revolver resting across his knee, staring out into the dark. It wasn't fear that drove him. It was resolve. For the first time in his life, he had something worth defending, and he knew the West would not let him keep it without a fight. It came 3 nights later. The moon was high, silvering the plains, when the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. This time there was no mistaking it. Clara bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering. Cole was already on his feet, pulling on his boots, his revolver strapped to his thigh. "They're here," he said simply, his voice calm, almost too calm. Clara grabbed his arm. "Cole, please, don't face them alone." He looked at her then, and for a moment the hard lines of his face softened. "I ain't alone anymore. That's the whole point." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, then turned and strode out into the night. The riders came fast this time, 5 of them, not 3. Their horses thundered into the yard, kicking up clouds of dust that glowed in the moonlight. The leader, the same man who had taunted Cole before, reined in his horse and sneered. "Well, well," the giant himself. "Thought maybe you'd run, McGraw. But here you are, standing tall like you own the night." Cole stepped forward, rifle in hand, his shadow stretching long across the dirt. "I told you once, you come back here, you won't leave the same way." The men laughed, but there was unease in their voices. They knew Cole's reputation. They knew he wasn't bluffing. Still, greed and cruelty made men reckless. The leader spat. "You think one man can stand against five? You think that woman behind you makes you stronger?" "No, McGraw, she makes you weak." Cole's jaw tightened. "She makes me human. And that's something you'll never understand." The standoff broke in an instant. One of the riders went for his gun, and the night erupted in fire and thunder. Cole's rifle cracked, the shot echoing across the plains, and the rider tumbled from his saddle before his pistol ever cleared leather. Chaos followed. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the yard became a storm of gunfire. Clara ducked behind the porch railing, her hands pressed to her mouth as bullets splintered wood around her. Cole moved like a force of nature. His size made him an easy target, but his speed and precision were unmatched. He fired, reloaded, and fired again, each shot deliberate, each one finding its mark. Two more riders fell, their bodies hitting the dirt with heavy thuds. But the fight was far from over. The leader and his last two men dismounted, using the corral fence for cover. Bullets whined past Cole's head, one grazing his arm and tearing through his sleeve. He grunted but didn't falter. "Cole!" Clara cried, her voice breaking. He glanced back at her, just for a heartbeat, and in that moment he saw not fear, but faith in her eyes. It was enough. He turned back to the fight, his resolve burning hotter than ever. The leader shouted, "You can't win, McGraw! You'll die here and she'll be ours to take." Cole's voice thundered across the yard, louder than the gunfire. "Over my dead body, and even then, I'd haunt you till the end of days." With a roar, he charged forward, abandoning cover, his revolver blazing. The sudden ferocity caught the riders off guard. One went down with a cry, clutching his chest. The other tried to flee, scrambling for his horse, but Cole's bullet struck true, dropping him before he reached the saddle. Now only the leader remained. The man stumbled back, his pistol shaking in his hand. "You're mad, McGraw. You'll throw your life away for her?" Cole advanced, his boots pounding the dirt, his revolver steady. "I ain't throwing my life away. I'm finally living it." The leader raised his gun, but his hand trembled. Cole fired first. The shot rang out, and the man crumpled to the ground, his pistol clattering uselessly beside him. Silence fell. The smoke drifted away, the echoes fading into the night. The only sound was Clara's ragged breathing as she stumbled from the porch, running to Cole's side. He stood there, chest heaving, blood seeping from the graze on his arm, his revolver still smoking in his hand. When Clara reached him, she threw her arms around his waist, clinging to him as though she'd never let go. Cole dropped the gun into the dirt and wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a cowboy, a fighter, or a legend. He was a man who had chosen love over solitude, and he had proven it with everything he had. But even as Clara wept against his chest, Cole knew the West would not let them rest easy. There would always be storms, always be men who wanted to test him. Yet tonight, he had shown the world and himself that his vow was no empty promise. He had said, "I'll be yours, only yours," and he had meant it with every breath in his body. Dawn broke over the plains, washing the ranch in soft gold. The bodies of the riders had been carried off, their threat ended, their laughter silenced. What remained was the quiet, the kind of quiet that comes only after a storm has passed. Cole stood in the porch, his arm bandaged, his hat pulled low. Clara stepped beside him, her hand slipping into his. For once he didn't pull away. He held her hand openly, as if daring the world to challenge what they had fought for. He had faced bullets, blood, and the weight of his own solitude, and in the end, he had kept his word. "Now," he said softly, his voice steady as the land itself, "I'll be yours." "Only yours," Clara smiled through her tears, knowing those words were no longer just a promise. They were the truth of a man who had finally chosen love over loneliness. And as the sun rose higher, the legend of Cole McGraw was no longer just about strength or fearlessness. It was about the cowboy who gave his heart and the woman who made him whole.